Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's presentation. I'm Tammy Diedrich, the Managing Editor of IBM Systems Magazine Power Systems Edition, and I'm the moderator for this event. Today's webinar is sponsored by Extol and is titled, Considering EDI as a Service, 10 Things You Need to Know. Our featured speakers today are Jim O'Leary and Ali Janan. Jim O'Leary is the Vice President of Product Strategy at Extol International and is an expert on strategic business and IT project planning. Jim has more than 20 years of senior and executive management experience with software companies and holds a deep understanding of current technological drivers across multiple industries. Ali Janan is the Director of Technical Services at Extol and holds more than 20 years of IT and B2B integration technology and service experience. He has managed countless successful integration projects for global supply chain companies and excels at redefining workflows to increase process efficiencies. Today, Jim and Ali will share 10 best practices to follow when planning and evaluating EDI services. Following the presentation, we'll have a brief Q&A period, so please feel free to enter your questions in the question panel on your screen anytime during the presentation. Now, without further ado, thanks again for joining us today. And Jim, I'll turn the presentation over to you.
Okay, thank you, Tammy. And again, thanks to all of you for taking time to join us today. We'll be looking at EDI as a service in more detail in just a second, but essentially, let me just quickly define it in basic terms. EDI as a service, as we're defining it, refers to the outsourcing of most of the activities needed to exchange and process electronic transactions with customers, vendors, and other external partners. And I say most activities because, as we'll explain a bit later, there are some EDI-related activities that are best kept in-house. So EDI as a service is an alternative to self-managed EDI, in which all of the activities remain in-house. Now, the most common reason for outsourcing EDI is a lack of resources or capability to manage EDI directly. But some businesses simply prefer to outsource EDI in order to focus internal resources on other priorities. So today, Ali and I will examine 10 planning and evaluation best practices that any company, regardless of size or industry, can incorporate in their EDI as a service decision process. But before we get to our best practices, let's take a closer look at the main differences between EDI as a service and self-managed EDI. This diagram shows the main elements of a self-managed EDI situation, and I'm just going to describe the big picture here because, as we'll see in a second, you can ignore most of the details with EDI as a service. So at the top, we see customers and vendors and other external partners with whom we need to transact a business electronically. And at the bottom, we see the enterprise software and data systems that consume the transaction data we receive from our partners at the top, and also produce data that we send out to those partners. Note also at the upper right, we see some cloud applications, and if your business uses software as a service applications, it's also important, obviously, to integrate with those as well when you send and receive partner transaction data. Now, the middle of the diagram is where EDI activities occur. If instead of outsourcing EDI, you decide to self-manage, then there are three main activities that you need to perform. The first is provisioning trading partner connections by setting up automated processes that integrate trading partner interactions with enterprise applications and data. And this activity is also referred to as trading partner onboarding, and most provisioning and integration activity occurs when you first move to a new EDI solution. But it also occurs on an ongoing basis as your business adds customers and vendors and as changes occur to transactions and communication details. The second important activity, which you see on the right, is monitoring EDI operations, which can include things like data preparation and exception handling, answering questions about processing status and outcomes, producing reports, and so on. And depending on the volume and frequency of EDI processing, monitoring activities can range from incidental to continuous. And the third activity area is managing the EDI environment, which includes installing and updating EDI middleware and tools, establishing production and test environments, configuring high availability and disaster recovery, backing up and archiving transaction logs, a lot of activities in this area. So if you subscribe to a hosted or managed environment, some of those activities may be outsourced, but the basic arrangement holds whether your business is a retailer, vendor, or intermediary. So if you've ever implemented or managed EDI, you know there's a lot more to this than what I just described about self-managed EDI, but basically these are the three sets of activities that you need to worry about. And, you know, if you have the right technologies and people and skill sets, self-management can be a good choice for many businesses. Now, let's move forward and see how EDI as a service differs from self-managed EDI. So here we have the same basic diagram, but in this case, we depicted EDI as a service instead of self-management. And you can see we've added an EDI service provider in the green oval on the right side. Usually, the service provider takes care of provisioning and integration and monitoring management of the EDI environment, all the things I just talked about. And that's most, but not all of the activities needed to set up and operate EDI. And as I mentioned a minute ago, there are some coordination activities that are best managed in-house. And Allie will be talking more about that in just a few minutes. Now, it's important to note that outsourcing EDI isn't an all or nothing choice. For example, you might choose to outsource the initial setup to a third party and then take direct responsibility for daily operations and monitoring. But today, we're going to assume that essentially everything is outsourced, everything except those few in-house activities that need to stay in-house. So this looks pretty simple. You just find a third party with EDI experience and let them run the show. But of course, it's not that simple. First of all, the EDI requirements in your business are likely to differ in some respects from those in similar businesses. For example, you might have trading partners that need your business to send and receive non-standard documents. You might have applications and data in-house that you need to use to run your business that will differ from the mix used at other companies. And that means your back-end integration requirements will also have to differ. But beyond technical differences like those, your business requirements for EDI as a service, things like how quickly you need to go live or how frequently things will change in the way that you send and receive transactions with partners or even integrate with your applications and data. Customer service levels may change, and other factors are going to eliminate some potential service providers due to the services they offer, limitations in services, support capacity, technical capabilities, cost, and other requirements. So really, it's a commonly held belief that EDI as a service offerings are pretty much the same, but as Allie and I will, I hope, demonstrate, there are important differences that can impact your business positively or negatively. And since EDI as a service usually involves an extended commitment, it's really important to understand those differences before you engage with a service provider. And that's the first of the key issues that Allie and I will address during today's webinar, what's most important to know and understand before you outsource EDI. The second key issue I've also mentioned, which is besides choosing an EDI service provider that meets your requirements, what do you need to do internally in order to coordinate events and decisions in your business with the actions that your service provider takes? And finally, what steps and precautions can you take to minimize surprises and missteps that could negatively affect your business? Now, one of the big benefits of EDI as a service is reduced complexity. Delegating EDI to a service provider can really greatly simplify trading partner integration when it's done correctly. But simplicity in making that decision comes at a cost, and that is that you need to understand enough about service provider capabilities, service options, and consequences before making a decision, because otherwise you might make the wrong one. Okay, with the introduction, let's move on to the 10 best practices for EDI as a service. And we're going to start with the question of determining whether EDI as a service is right for your business. So since you've tuned into this webinar, it's likely that you believe EDI as a service might be the right choice for your business. And under ideal circumstances, it can work for any business, but it's better suited to some business situations than to others. So let's take a look at the main factors that determine whether it's a good fit or not. And the very first one is how urgent is your need to go live. So when you've got modest implementation requirements, for example, small number of trading partners, fairly simple last mile integration requirements, I'll talk about that in a little bit, EDI as a service usually requires less time and effort for initial provisioning than self-managed EDI. So if you need to get up and running quickly and don't have the resources to manage that in-house, EDI as a service can be a very good choice. The next factor is to consider how strategic EDI is to your business. And transportation, 3PLs, and other information-driven businesses with a strategic stake in reliable, responsive EDI might prefer the increased control that's offered by self-managed EDI. So those kinds of businesses might not be ideal candidates for EDI as a service. So if that's a consideration in your case, you might want to consider self-management. The third factor is to consider how many trading partners you need to integrate. So businesses with hundreds or thousands of trading partners will experience higher change management, usually, activities, and exception management costs with either approach. But supply side and intermediary businesses that are focused on customer service excellence may be able to provide better service at lower cost with self-managed EDI than EDI as a service. The next factor is whether you have qualified IT personnel available to do self-management, and businesses without EDI experience or available IT resources that can be trained to manage EDI are generally good fits for EDI as a service, unless other factors argue for bringing EDI in-house. The next question is how wide the range of partner integration requirements is for your business. So if your business serves as an intermediary or in a supply-side role, then the transaction and protocol and service level demands of your customers might require a pretty wide range of implementation capabilities, and self-managed EDI can sometimes be a better fit for those kinds of cases. The next thing we want to consider is the degree of customization needed in order to integrate with the applications and data that your business uses. So minimizing manual processing errors and delays requires direct integration, we call it last mile integration, between EDI processes and your applications and data. So that requires internal business and IT system knowledge, and again, that might favor self-managed EDI over EDI as a service. There's the question then also of how frequently things change. I mentioned this a bit earlier. For example, suppliers of commodity goods and services generally experience high partner churn, and therefore they have a need for frequent partner onboarding and frequent changes. Self-managed EDI generally offers more control over that, especially the speed of onboarding in such cases. And the final factor to consider is service level complexity. So large EDI trading partners can impose pretty strict service level conditions on things like order accuracy and response windows and other performance factors. And chargebacks or vendor scorecard penalties or other negative consequences can occur if they're violated. So self-managed EDI provides more control over meeting those service level requirements than EDI as a service. But again, the point here is not to argue that one of these is better than the other. It might seem that a lot of these factors argue for self-managed EDI, but that's really the point of this slide. EDI as a service can be viable even in the presence of factors that favor self-managed EDI. But when that's the case, it's really important to choose a service provider that will deliver the level of capability and performance and response your business needs. So the point there is to be aware of what those requirements are going into your discussion with potential service providers. Now, one more point I want to note concerns OpEx budgeting or operating expense budgeting. It's been traditionally a differentiator and an advantage of EDI as a service. The reason it's absent from the table on this slide is because many self-managed options, like our own Extol Business Integrator middleware, offer subscription licensing. Because OpEx budgeting is available for both EDI as a service and self-managed EDI, I didn't include it in the chart because it's really no longer the decision factor that it was. Okay, so to discuss our second best practice, let me turn the floor over to Allie. Allie?
Thank you, Jim, and hello, everyone. For this section of the presentation for option 2 here, conducting an inventory of current and future EDI needs, I'm going to circle back to a slide that Jim had earlier in the presentation, really where we take your business and we break it up into really 3 sections: the external locations, partners and services, EDI middleware in the middle, and then your on-premise applications. One of the first things to consider when you're looking at the inventory of your current and future EDI needs are the number of trading partners that you're going to want to onboard now and in the future. So, for example, you may currently have a list of, say, 50 trading partners that you're working with today, but you know in your business model you're bringing on a new division or you have additional trading partners that you're going to want to bring on. It's very important to think about the future onboarding of trading partners so that you can keep that in mind when you're deciding, is this EDI as a service the right option for you? The second piece, where I'm coming back a little bit from that outer layer, is the EDI documents and the directions that they travel. So you may be a standard order-to-cash EDI 850 purchase order all the way through to an EDI 810 invoice on the way back out. Pretty standard, pretty straightforward. I believe that most EDI as a service companies will be very comfortable with that process flow, but you may be a warehousing company and you're doing EDI transactions for, say, the 943 and 944, which are warehouse transactions. You may be a logistics company and you're doing a 204 load tender inbound all the way through to a 214 status update outbound to your trading partner. So it's important to consider the EDI documents and also the directions that they go. You might be on the vendor side, you may be on the customer side. Document all that stuff, have that all together, and make sure that you know what you're looking at both today and in the future. The third piece would be the communication methods needed. Some of that can be dictated by your business itself, but some of it's dictated by the companies that you coordinate with. Are you working through FTP today, but you have a pretty large customer that you're looking at bringing on board and all they do is AS2 communications? Is that AS2 communication provided by the service provider that you're looking to go with? It's very important to get those communication methods nailed down and to also think about, as I said, in the future, what communications might you need. Another piece to think about is when we're not talking, even though we're talking about EDI as a service, when I think of EDI from a technical services perspective, I think about any type of electronic data transfer from point A to point B, regardless of the source, regardless of the target. So if you have non-EDI transaction requirements, for example, your back-end system is an XML-based system, and all EDI transactions inbound have to go to an XML-type format. Does the provider give you the capability to do anything to anything, or can you do flat files? Can you do XML? When you're doing your inventory, think about those transactions as well. That kind of flows right into the last piece, is the back-end integration. Does this service provider integrate with the back-end systems that you have today? Do you have a homegrown system where there are database tables that you and or somebody in the past has developed internally for your database structure? Is it an out-of-the-box type integration where you're dealing with SAP or JD Edwards or some other sort of ERP? And what kind of track record does the EDI as a service provider have with those types of transactions?
All right, great. Thanks, Ali. So let's move on to our next best practice, which is to use a lifecycle framework to evaluate different EDI as a service options. Frankly, it can be confusing to compare different EDI as a services options because different terminology and capabilities and options, you have to be able to sort through those. And in order to do that effectively, it really helps to have a framework of some sort, something that defines the requirements for your business in a way that you can map provider options to very easily. So it makes it easier to compare provider options. It also helps to uncover potentially important service gaps in provider offerings. So here are the 4 activity phases that we believe should be included in any kind of a framework. And by the way, the form that this framework takes is usually some sort of a checklist. But it includes, first of all, gathering and planning activities. So this includes gathering partner specs, EDI specifications, sample data, and planning and implementation readiness tasks that ensure service delivery is going to meet your business needs. Then there's design and implementation activities, and the focus of this phase is on the delivery of complete, customized, end-to-end EDI processes that are tested and ready for production. The third set of activities is monitoring and management. So once implementation is complete, you're ready to send, receive, and process EDI data. So this phase focuses on daily EDI operation activities that deliver correct results and meet required service levels. And then the last phase is change management and maintenance. And this encompasses ongoing updates to the EDI environment and to EDI processes in response to trading partner and operating environment changes. So the point of this slide is that somehow, and this may not be the list that you use in your evaluation, but it's a good starting point. Somehow, someone needs to provide all of the services on your checklist. So if your EDI service provider or provider candidate doesn't cover them, it becomes your job to figure out how they're going to get done. So it's a best practice to build a single checklist of all the requirements and use it consistently to evaluate all of the provider options that you're looking at before you make a decision. Now, I mentioned that service providers can also use different terms when referring to the same capability. So again, mapping those different terms to your own lifecycle checklist can really help you cut through the jargon and focus on services that you really need. That takes us to our fourth best practice, which is to focus your decision on what your business needs, not what various providers are capable of delivering. So to talk about that, I'll hand it back to Allie.
Thank you, Jim. So again, it's important to think about your internal requirements. Obviously, you need to check what your providers are going to offer to you as far as EDI as a service. But once you've established the requirements on your side, it will help you understand what the functional capabilities are that you have that the provider must have. There may be some that are not so important to you in your business and you're willing to do without, or you're going to have staff that's able to do some of that internally. What is the range of services that they provide? Do they offer communications such as the AS2 communications or VAN communications, as well as doing the mapping or the setups? Is there licensing options for you as far as different types of transactions you're going to work with? Or is it one flat rate for any type of transaction? You know, are you going to have more costs involved if you get into web services as opposed to FTP communications? All things to consider when you're thinking about your internal requirements. What is the change turnaround? When you have a request, we all know that your business doesn't stop when the EDI department needs to bring on a new trading partner. And if that trading partner has a requirement to be up within a week, can your provider do that? Is that something that's the norm in your business, or do you generally have more time to go through the internal process of analyzing what documents this customer needs completely? What's the communication method? How does it work? What kind of discussions are you going to have with the service provider, and what are they willing to do or not do in terms of speaking with your trading partners? Are you always going to need someone in-house to be that middle person between your trading partner and the EDI as a service provider? Sometimes that can get a little, you have a middle person anytime you're talking and you need to have that person involved or nothing can get done. Or does your EDI as a service provider actually work directly with your trading partners and assist in getting that rolled out rather quickly? Understanding how partner setups and changes work. Obviously, whenever you bring on a new trading partner or new document, there's going to be some requirements and specs that go along with that document. That's going to need to be shared between your business and the service provider, whether it's EDI, non-EDI, updates to transactions. So the requirements and the specs are important to share between your business and the service provider. How does the authorization work? Understanding how you can provide that information to the service provider that says, yes, go ahead and do this. Who internally in your business has the ability to make that request? And does the service provider give you estimates of time, turnaround time? The next piece is, how are the status and checkpoint processes working? When you hand it over to your service provider, they're obviously integrating with something on your system, so there needs to be that internal person that is able to test to make sure that, say, an inbound purchase order becomes a purchase order. Are you expecting that status checkpoint process to happen just when they're done? Are you setting up regularly scheduled calls with the service provider? And is your trading partner involved in that process? When you move on to the testing, how do we test with your trading partners? Does the service provider actually work directly with you and the trading partner? Can you pass data back and forth so that information goes out of their system into yours and you can see the full cycle? Or, are they just saying, hey, we're going to email them this EDI document and get them to sign off on it? Finally, the sign-off process. Who internally and how does that work with the service provider? Obviously, somebody internal to your business needs to say, yes, this is good, no, it's not. I think it's important that person is someone who understands the business, and we'll get to this a little bit further down the line here in these presentations, but who is that person and how do they know that it actually meets your internal business needs as well as the needs of the trading partner that you're working with? That brings me to the next slide where we're talking about the internal champion. Authorizing someone to coordinate with the provider to be the main point of contact. That person needs to be a pretty special person, I think. In my history in this industry, it can't be someone who just can get the processes done. They need to understand the business. They need to be able to talk with trading partners. They need to be able to be that mediator between the EDI service provider, your company, and the trading partner. They need to be able to escalate things when things start going off track. There needs to be that internal buy-in. That person, if they understand that piece of the business, it makes it much easier to steer and direct your EDI as a service provider to get the results that you're looking for. What are the implementation priorities? If you have 10 projects on the list with your EDI as a service provider, and a new trading partner comes along, and it's a huge piece to your business, and the vice president of sales or the CEO says this needs to be onboarded first, are you able to shuffle those implementation priorities? Are you able to work with your trading partners and the provider to make that happen? How do you document or do all the change requirements and the approvals? Who's monitoring the status of the process? And finally, this person is signing off on the delivery and making sure that what you're looking to have done with your service provider has been done to your standards.
So we're going to switch gears here. Ali really was just focusing mainly on the process side of working with the service provider. I'd like to go back now and talk a little bit more about last mile integration. I've used that term a couple of times, and I've mentioned how important it is to integrate the EDI service that you select with the applications and data that your business uses. So that's what we refer to as last mile integration. And the term, it really means that you're spanning that final gap between your trading partners at the top of this diagram and your IT environment at the bottom. So this diagram shows two different ways, actually, to deploy EDI as a service and implement last mile integration. On the left, the EDI environment resides outside your business, and on the right, service is provided by connecting remotely to EDI middleware that is deployed on-premise. Now, in both cases, last mile integration is important. So the implementation approach really is sort of irrelevant here. What's really important is to enable end-to-end automation of EDI processing. That's really the end goal that we're trying to achieve here. And end-to-end automation eliminates the need for manual processing, and that in turn removes a major source of errors and delays. And that adds up to eliminating cost. Now, some businesses don't factor in the need for last mile integration. We did see in the poll that we pushed earlier that direct integration with applications and data is an important requirement for 75% of you. So it's clearly an important factor in the minds of most of the people in this audience. But in some cases, it's not considered, and usually it's because of one of two things, either because the EDI as a service provider doesn't have strong integration capabilities and therefore doesn't bring it up, or the other reason is concerns about integration costs get in the way. And it's important to consider integration costs, of course, but it's also important to weigh those costs against benefits of end-to-end automation. And I just want to quickly refer to a 2014 benchmark study published by Supply Chain Insights, which revealed that not automating EDI processes completely adds $78 of additional cost per order among the companies that they surveyed, several hundred companies on average. So that's per order, per instance. So in addition to reducing operating costs like that, last mile integration also makes it possible to scale EDI processing as your business grows, and to retain accuracy and low cost and auditability in the process. And without end-to-end automation, many businesses with close to cost business models would be unprofitable. So, and of course, let me just say this, it can be cost prohibitive to automate every possible process. I mean, there's some low-value processes or rarely used processes that it might not make sense to automate. But for most businesses, the payback on last mile integration overall is rapid and substantial. So it pays to compare the manual processing costs and risks of not integrating, not automating end-to-end against the costs of implementing end-to-end automation before you finalize your EDI as a service plan. Now, EDI outsourcing arrangements fail sometimes to deliver full value because of hidden costs or because service provider selection can be driven by a limited analysis of total ownership costs. And understanding a provider's fee structure and one-time charges may not give you a complete understanding of that total cost of ownership because it can also include direct and indirect costs that don't surface during provider discovery. So a complete TCO analysis should include at least the following, beginning with assessment and planning fees. So these are fees that the provider may assess at the very beginning of the process to understand your requirements and make sure that the requirements are documented accurately to provide a basis for coming back to you and getting your sign-off on results. Next, there are one-time charges for things like account setup and configuration and integration. And integration costs may include, in some cases, per transaction and per partner configuration charges, in addition to last mile application and data integration costs. So it really pays to get into the details of exactly what your provider is charging you for. Next are recurring fees, which include typically monthly or annual subscription fees that can vary according to the level of service that you're subscribing to. But they can also include per partner, per endpoint, or per deployed EDI process fees. Or they can include billable fees based on measured usage, like per transaction or per document or per kilocharacter fees. And additional fees for exception handling and error resolution may also be assessed, usually on a per incident basis, to cover the cost of diagnosing and handling exceptions. And then there are maintenance and change fees that cover ongoing partner setup costs and changing, for example, EDI version changes, integration changes. A variety of things can change, not just in your EDI processes, but also in the environment and in last mile integration. And finally, there are costs that are frequently excluded from many TCO analyses, and these can be substantial. They include the costs of manual processing and error correction if you don't fully automate processing end-to-end. There are supplemental costs needed to satisfy requirements that aren't met by your EDI service provider. For example, support for document types that aren't supported by your provider. There may be opportunity costs to consider, especially if the service provider limitations make it difficult to accommodate new customer requirements. And there are early termination fees and the costs of switching to a new EDI service provider or a self-management arrangement or EDI as a service term. So understanding provider fees and one-time charges is really just the beginning of TCO analysis. A complete analysis of costs also needs to consider the projected number and frequency of implementation changes, out-of-band exceptions, plus indirect costs of using and integrating the service. So our next best practice focuses on how to reduce or eliminate switching costs in particular. So let's move forward and take a closer look at that. Okay, so it should be clear, I guess, first of all, I should say that EDI as a service is not purely a service, right? Service providers configure trading partner connections and EDI transactions and last mile integrations and other solution elements that are customized to the way that the service needs to work for your business. And those investments that your business makes are substantial and valuable. And moving to a different EDI solution means having to recreate them. So along with the time spent in planning and acquiring and migrating partners and retraining, EDI solution configuration is an important switching cost to consider when moving from one EDI solution to another. Now, fortunately, there are some strategies that you can employ for mitigating and even eliminating some switching costs. And let's start with choosing a service provider with an onboarding speed advantage. So some EDI as a service providers can configure EDI transactions faster and less expensively by exploiting things like large-grained reuse, for example, at the EDI processor project level, and tools that automate low-level implementation activities like creating and renaming objects and setting partner-specific parameters and generating acknowledgments, things like that. So when you talk with prospective service providers, it's important to ask them how they onboard trading partners and how long it takes. Second, you can build a solution-independent interface layer for last-mile integration. Now, this isn't something we see very commonly except in larger organizations because it's not an inexpensive thing to do, but it is a viable strategy to define this mediating layer of files or services or database tables because that can reduce the time and cost required to replace an EDI service at the top and also to replace back-end applications and data resources. You could also choose a provider with an integration speed advantage. So we talked about onboarding speed advantage, but separately there's the question of how quickly your provider can integrate with the applications and data that you need them to integrate to. So like onboarding, the time cost of implementing last mile integration can be reduced by using effective reuse methods and automation tools. So again, when you evaluate service providers, ask them about their strategy for minimizing last mile integration costs. And finally, you can choose a provider with a hybrid solution that allows you to both self-manage and outsource EDI at your choice. In other words, you can decouple your EDI platform and service provider decisions by choosing a solution that offers both possibilities based on a common EDI platform. So this gives you the ability to move between, in this case, outsourced EDI management to self-management, simply by switching control or switching which party maintains and manages the environment. Okay, we're coming to the end of our best practices discussion. So to wrap it up, let me turn it back to Allie. Allie?
Thank you, Jim. The final best practice is, I think, a pretty straightforward one, and just making sure that you're looking for a collaborative partner with a track record that meets needs like your company needs. So, for example, if you're a manufacturing company and you're looking for a vendor to get your key supplies from, right, you're going to want to make sure that that vendor can do everything that you need to produce your goods. You're going to need to make sure that they can get you the goods on time. You're going to need to make sure that they can have a backlog so that it doesn't take a long time to get there. So some of the things just to think about is, how long has this company been in business? You know, what do they do? Have they been doing it for a long time? Look at getting into customer references. Obviously, you want to talk to customers of theirs to make sure that they're dealing with other businesses that do the similar work that you do. What is their industry experience? Do they have the capabilities to do EDI as well as XML or flat file or other types of integration? If you're in the healthcare industry, healthcare documents are large documents that have a lot of transactions per message. Does their solution lend itself to doing those types of transactions, or are they not really built for that? What is their team size and what is their composition? What does it look like internally to your vendor? You're looking at establishing a relationship with this company. This provider is going to be a one-off from your business. It could directly affect your business. And if you say today, we talked before about some of the inventories that you're doing. If you're talking about today, we're dealing with volumes of, say, 2,000 transactions per day. But in 2 years from now, you might be doing 2,000 transactions per hour between the times of 8 a.m. and 5 p.m. That's a much different model that this provider needs to be able to grow and expand and be able to satisfy those needs for you. Ongoing support. What is their support like? Do you actually get a person? Do you talk to someone? What is the guaranteed turnaround time? Do they have after-hour support? If your system is down and it's 2 in the morning and you need something restored, what is their policy for that? You don't want to, we all know if you're working at a company and the system goes down and you're responsible for EDI, you're getting a phone call in the middle of the night and you're heading to the office and you're bringing that back up. So it's important to make sure that you find a provider that has those type of capabilities. And finally, just something I'm going to throw out there. I know it's a personal opinion of mine. After you do all this research, after you look at these 10 best practices, go with your gut. Go with someone that you feel good about working with, about that person being a piece of your business in moving forward.
Okay. Thanks, Ali. So we have a little bit of time to take some questions from the audience, and I see there are some questions here. Before I turn it over to Tammy to moderate our Q&A session, let me just mention we, of course, I wouldn't say we scratched the surface, but we certainly haven't exhausted the topic of best practices for EDI as a service planning and evaluation. So I want to mention we have a white paper available on this subject with more details in it that you can download from our website. Just go to the address you see on the screen there, xstol.com/EDI as a service, and you can download the white paper and read the rest of the story. Okay, Tammy, I'll turn it over to you then.
All right, thank you. So I'd like to take a few minutes to answer some questions. Again, if you do have a question, you can use the Q&A panel on the right side of your screen to send it in. Okay, first question. What kind of experience or what type of person do you recommend be the internal champion?
Ali, why don't you take that one?
Yeah, definitely. I'll take that. That person, in my eyes, has to be someone that is able to talk both technically and about the business. So that person needs to be able to coordinate with sales and accounting and manufacturing if you're that type of business, or transportation if you're in the transportation industry. So they can understand your business and have a technical background to know enough of how processes work. In my opinion, that person needs to be someone who's not, I know it's easy to say, but they're not easily, they don't get their feathers ruffled easily, for lack of a better term. They are able to stay calm because, these type of transactions and managing these types of this type of business is not easy. And, there will be problems, there will be issues. So that person needs to be able to stay calm in the face of adversity and be able to work with everyone inside of your organization.
Okay, next question. Who should the champion get for management buy-in? Is that like a C level or a V level?
Yeah, I can take that one too, and Jim, you can add on if you'd like. A champion, in my opinion, anytime you do anything that's EDI, because I know I'm going to throw a term out there that most of you have probably heard. EDI is just this black box in the corner, and it just works, and I don't care about it until it doesn't work, right? But we all know that it's potentially a 24/7 job for us in the industry, and it's not just a black box. So that champion has to be someone on the C level, in my opinion, and if you can't have that in your organization, at least at the vice president level, to have that champion be able to work with that vice president and work with them and have that buy-in so that they can express to the rest of the organization that EDI isn't just a black box. It doesn't just work on its own. It's a key integral part, as important as accounting as it is to receiving the checks from your customers. It's as important.
Yeah, just to add a couple of comments. There are some signs I think that are easy to pick up about who should be who should be the executive that you need to involve when questions come up or problems occur and you need to escalate. One is who signs the check, right? Who is the person whose budget the EDI project is being paid from? And another sign is who gets value from the result of the project or the implementation. For example, if you're mainly integrating customers, buy-side partners, then VP of sales, somebody who's responsible for revenue in your company is a good person to engage. If you're primarily integrating with suppliers or vendors, then maybe a VP of supply chain manager, somebody in that kind of a role would be a good person to get involved.
Okay, how are the services paid for? Is it like a monthly flat fee or is it by the transaction?
I can take that one, Allie. The answer, of course, is it depends. And some vendors offer a choice of several options. Usually there's some sort of monthly subscription fee, but then because companies have different capacity requirements and trading volumes and other requirements, there are usually other fees. There can be usage fees per transaction or per kilocharacter or per document as well. It really varies from provider to provider. So that's one of the very important questions, of course, to ask before you sign on the dotted line is, what are all those fees? Use your own internal projections to figure out what your monthly cost should be, and then that gives you a good basis for comparison. Okay,
there are a variety of XML formats. Does Xtool support Rosetta Net?
Yeah, I can, again, take this one, and then, Allie, if you want to add anything. Yes, we have customers using the Rosetta Net XML documents. We don't support the RNIF framework specifically, if that's what you're looking for. We do provide support, however, for transforming and processing the Rosetta Net document formats. Allie, you want to add to that?
No, I agree. I have a couple customers that I've worked with here, Jim, that we do that for, but I agree with what you said there. The XML format is pretty straightforward as far as all of the different elements that are in there for the Rosetta Net side of things, but the RNF side just adds another layer of complexity to that process. That process in general is a little tricky, in my experience anyway.
All right, looking at the clock, I want to respect everyone's time, so we're going to wrap this up. If we didn't get to your question, we will get back to you via email. Thank you, gentlemen, for sharing your expertise with us today. Just a quick note that we will be sending out a link early next week to a recording of today's presentation to everyone who's on the call, as well as to anyone who registered for this event but for whatever reason couldn't make it. And also in that email, we will include a link to that companion white paper on the best practices for EDI as a service, so look for that as well. That concludes our webinar. I want to thank everyone for attending, and have a great day.